Hey guys, the other day the Pokémon Company International announced a new Pokémon game is in the works, Pokémon Legends Z. And I can't wait to play this game and to share everything with you guys. It's gonna be so much fun. Although the Pokémon Company announced that this game is slated for 2025, there's really not a whole lot that we know about the game, including who the starters are going to be. And this really bothers me because I want to know who the starters are going to be so I can start prepping my team, or at least thinking about who I want to have on my team for Pokémon Legends Z. So in today's video, I'm going to be attempting to answer the question, who are the starters going to be in Pokémon Legends Z? The first thing that we need to consider is this game's setting. So we know that this game is going to be set within Kalos, specifically within Lumio City. With it being a Kalos game, the first thing that may come to your mind is these are going to be the starters, Fennekin, Chespin, and Froakie. And I think to understand Pokémon Legends Z, we really need to take a deep dive into Pokémon Legends Arceus so that we can understand maybe a little bit more about what we're expecting. And while yes, these are the Kalos starters, I don't think they're going to be the starters that we're going to receive in Pokémon Legends Z. The reason for this is because I think that we need to look to the past to predict the future. In other words, we need to consider Pokémon Legends Arceus as essentially the base plate for this game. Most of you clicking on this video are probably Pokemon fans, but just for those that may not be aware, Hisui was based on an ancient Sinnoh. And the Sinnoh starters were not the main starter choices that we got in Pokémon Legends Arceus. Instead of having the Sinnoh starters or the traditional Sinnoh starters for this game, we were being offered Rowlet, Cyndaquil, and Oshawott as our starters. This was truly groundbreaking and truly a unique experience. Never before in any other Pokemon game have fans had the choice of 3 starter Pokemon all from different regions. I'm going to be considering Pokemon Legends Z as something of a sequel to Pokemon Legends Arceus. I don't actually think that this game is going to be a direct sequel, like the events of Pokemon Legends Arceus are going to be playing into the events of Pokemon Legends Z, but we don't know. But what I am considering is that this game is going to be something of a spiritual successor, and that a lot of the tropes that were set up in Pokemon Legends Arceus are going to be echoed in Pokemon Legends Z. Now, because Rowlet, Cyndaquil, and Oshawott were the starter options that we had in Pokemon Legends Arceus, I think it's pretty safe to say that they are not going to be the options that we get as starters in Pokemon Legends Z. On top of that, whereas Pokemon Legends Z is somewhat of a spiritual successor to Pokemon Legends Arceus, I also think it's pretty safe to assume that Chespin, Froakie, and Fennekin, not specifically in that order, are also not going to be the starters in Pokemon Legends Z. But obviously these are Kalos Pokemon. They're going to be featured in the game at some point, though probably not as the starters. Now, something the true Pokemon fan is probably going to realize, or if you played the original game, something that you might be considering already, is that these are not the only starters that you're given as an option in Pokemon X and Y. Early in the game, you're actually given the options of the Kanto starters as well. This obviously is going to throw a little bit of a curveball in Pokemon Legends Z. Even though I'm very confident we're not going to be getting Bulbasaur, Charmander, or Squirtle as the starter options for this game, they will probably be in this game at some point. Not just because you receive them as secondary starters in the story of Kalos, but because the main gimmick that everyone is excited about is returning Mega Evolution. And obviously, the Kanto starters all already have Mega Evolutions. Now, with this gimmick making a return, I think it's pretty safe to assume that we're going to be getting new Mega Evolutions in Pokemon Legends Z. This is a revisiting of Mega Evolution as we revisit the region that introduced Mega Evolution in the first place. The timing has never been better for new Mega Pokemon. And I think it's pretty clear that the Pokemon Company International is pretty excited about a Charizard, Mega Charizard Z, making its debut in Pokemon Legends Z, but I think that as these Pokemon already have Mega Evolutions, they're likely not going to be receiving any others aside from Charizard. And obviously, with Mega Evolution making a return, I think it's pretty safe to assume that the starters that we get in Pokemon Legends Z are going to be getting new Mega Evolutions. So, with that being said, you know who won't be receiving new Mega Evolutions? Sceptile, Blaziken, and Swampert. I see no shot that these Pokemon are going to be the starters for Pokemon Legends Z. Now, just to be clear, I think that in any situation, these starters would be amazing to have in Pokemon Legends Z as starters. But once again, I think that they're going to be available at some point in the game just later down the line. I think we'll be able to catch them in the game, or at least be able to obtain them maybe through Pokemon Home because of these Mega Evolutions. but because they already have Mega Evolutions, there's no way we're getting these, or at least getting new Mega Evolutions. Also, just keep this in consideration, okay? The last time we were able to use Sceptile, Blaziken, and Swampert's Mega forms was in Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, a game that is turning 10 years old this year in 2024. Who else is feeling exceptionally old right now? Moving on to who I think will be the starters, let's take a look at our list once again. Now, I'm going to go ahead and cross off Trico, Torchic, and Mudkip, and now is when things gets potentially a little bit more complicated. Taking a look at the Paldean starters, I will start off by saying that many of you are probably thinking, Scotty, there is no shot these Pokemon get new starters or get featured as the starters in Pokemon Legends Z. And while there's to some point I agree with you, it's important to remember that this is still a Gen 9 Pokemon game. Pokemon Legends Z is still a Gen 9 Pokemon game. So again, not really a point in my favor that the Pokemon that featured in Gen 9 as the starters are going to be the starters in Pokemon Legends Z. However, we are still at the very beginning, or at least we're still in the marketing cycle for Pokemon from Paldea, specifically Fuecoco, Quaxley, and Sprigatito. These Pokemon are everywhere right now in the marketing, so maybe it would make sense to give them just a little bit of love, but not all of them. One Pokemon in particular, if you take a look at the Pokedex, calls out that it's not really from Paldea. Taking a look at Pokemon Scarlet's Pokedex, this Pokemon, whoever the starter is, migrated to Paldea from a distant lands long ago. Now, the first thing that we have to consider on here is, what does distant lands mean? Because Paldea and Kalos, they are bordering regions. So maybe it's not so distant, but you gotta, they're not from Paldea. This Pokemon is not from Paldea. Now, obviously, the Pokemon that I'm talking about, if you're familiar with the Pokedex, is none other than Quaxley, our little duck boy that we love very, very much. And again, I can't cross Quaxley off entirely from the list because distant lands is kind of vague, and I think it's intentionally vague. But just because it's intentionally vague, that does not mean that this Pokemon is going to be a starter in Pokemon Legends Z. Again, this is a Gen 9 Pokemon being featured in a Gen 9 game. It just doesn't seem that likely that we're going to get additional love to a Pokemon, a starter Pokemon specifically, without giving love to the other two starter Pokemon. Except it has been done before. Let's look at Ash Greninja, or Battle Bond Greninja, depending on how you want to look at it. Now, let's talk about this for just a second. Indulge me for just a moment here, okay? Because Ash Greninja, or Battle Bond Greninja, was introduced in Pokemon X and Y, or at least in the X and Y anime. Now, we didn't necessarily get access to using this Pokemon until Pokemon Sun and Moon, or Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, which was the generation after Pokemon X and Y. But it was still introduced within the life cycle of the anime in Pokemon X and Y. Take that with a grain of salt, okay? Because there's really, this is a really iffy argument for Quaxley, but I felt like I had to bring it up because there is precedence for Pokemon being kind of more heavily featured in other games. And specifically with this Pokedex entry, it makes me think that we're not done looking at Quaxley yet, or the Quaxley line. There is a chance, albeit very slim, but there is a chance that we can see Quaxley as the starter in Pokemon Legends Z. Now, do I think that's necessarily likely? No, I don't. I really don't think that we're going to be getting Quaxley as a starter in Pokemon Legends Z. But with the Paldean starters crossed off, that eliminates all of the least likely starters, in my opinion, to be the main starters trio for Pokemon Legends Z. So, now we need to do a little bit of a deep dive to see who the other candidates are and who the main starters could be and who I think the starters are going to be. Starting with the most recent region of Galar. Now, these Pokemon, Scorbunny, Grookey, and Sobble, incredible Pokemon. And there is a chance, maybe a slim chance, but there is a chance that one of the three here will be featured as a starter Pokemon in the new in the new Kalos region, whenever that takes place. But once again, I want to remind you that these games, the Pokémon Legends Z, is a Gen 9 Pokémon game. And surprisingly, Game Freak and the Pokémon Company International have been giving a lot of love to Pokémon that originated from the Galar region. Specifically speaking, Duraludon evolving into Archaludon, Applin evolving into Diplin, and then eventually again into Hydrapple. I mean, there's still a chance that we could see these starters getting additional love, one of these starters getting additional love in the newest title. Or at least it's important to note that I really can't see a reason why one of these Pokemon wouldn't or couldn't be one of the starters in Pokemon Legends Z. And whereas I can't easily eliminate these Pokemon as prospects for the starter Pokemon in Legends Z, we have to consider them as an option as a starter. Next up, we have to evaluate the Sinnoh starters. Now, Turtwig, Chimchar, and Piplup are all strong candidates for starters in Pokemon Legends Z. These Pokemon's home region just recently had new games developed for them. Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, or Pining Sheryl, and Pokemon Legends Arceus. With both of those games being set in their home region of Sinnoh, or, ancient Sinnoh or Hisui, these Pokemon did not really get any love or attention. These Pokemon, as much as it pains me to say it, are old. They are from one of the oldest regions in the books at this point. They're on the early half of Pokemon. That's weird. That's weird. Hold on. I don't think I'm gonna recover from that one. And with these Pokemon being featured in an older game and an older region and not having any additional changes to them or updates to these Pokemon, power creep has kind of pushed these Pokemon into more of an insignificant slot. So there's a pretty good chance that these Pokemon are going to be getting some attention, or at least there's a chance that these Pokemon could be getting some attention in Pokemon Legends Arceus. And when I said Pokemon Legends Arceus, I meant Pokemon Legends Z. But let's talk about Pokemon Legends Arceus while we're on the topic. And that is because Pokemon Legends Arceus created an imbalance in 3 regions' starter trios. Obviously, the Alola, the Johto, and the Unova region have an imbalance on their teams right now. Litten, Popplio, Chikorita, Totodile, Snivy, and Tepig all are Pokemon that their homeboy got a new form and a new evolution, but they didn't. They didn't get any love or attention in Pokemon Legends Arceus, or in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, or any other Pokemon game for that matter. That's a shame. These are great Pokemon. All of these Pokemon debuted in regions that are a little bit older and whose gimmicks have somewhat faded into irrelevance or never had a gimmick in the first place. All of these Pokemon very plausibly could be featured as a starter in Pokemon Legends Z. It's honestly really difficult to cross out any of the Pokemon at this point because all of the Pokemon that are here have a really good likelihood of being the starter. All of them somewhat have an equal option of being the starter. But I think that I've narrowed it down for you guys. I think that I know without a doubt who the starters are in Pokemon Legends Z. And let's go into it. So we have the 12 Pokemon here, and who are the starters? None other than our homeboys, Chikorita, Scorbunny, and Piplup. And I think that I can prove it, or at least I have some pretty convincing arguments as to why I believe these Pokemon are the starters in Pokemon Legends Z. So many of you may be asking, why Chikorita? And I'd like to counter that argument with my own, why not? Chikorita is one of my favorite starter Pokemon of all time, or my favorite Pokemon of all time, and out of all of the Pokemon on this list, I think he may be one of the most deserving as well. Personal biases aside, Chikorita was first debuted in one of the oldest regions, actually the second oldest region, a region in which we've only revisited once in Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver, which just, to bring up again, is an old game. This game, I think, was back in 2010. It's time to revisit some of the Johto Pokemon, which I think was a very real reason why we got Hisui and Decidueye. But because Hisui and Decidueye got a new form, or because am I saying Decidueye? I meant Typhlosion. Because Typhlosion got a new form in Pokemon Legends Arceus, I think that there's a really good chance that the other Johto starters could be featured as the starters of this game, as previously mentioned, but specifically Chikorita because it is old, and I think that it fits the best out of all of the Pokemon for the grass-type Pokemon. So I brought up Piplup being the option for the water starter in Pokemon Legends Z, and this one I think is a little bit more convincing of an argument other than it's old, which, again, this is an older Pokemon from an older game that hasn't had any attention given to it outside of its home region. And even with the revisit to its home region, it didn't get any new special features or gimmicks associated with it. But the real reason that I think Piplup is going to be the starter in Pokemon Legends Z is actually because of Empoleon. I think that this is a very safe choice for the water starter in Pokemon Legends Z because Empoleon is based off of an emperor penguin and draws a lot of its inspiration from Napoleon Bonaparte, who was an emperor of France. And obviously, France is Kalos. These are the same. I mean, not really the same, but Kalos is based off of France. So it makes a lot of sense to give the Pokemon that is probably based off of the French emperor a new form, or at least some attention in Pokemon Legends Z. It's a slam dunk, honestly. I mean, it makes so much sense. No joke, out of all of the starter Pokemon for Pokemon Legends Z, I'd be willing to bet the most on Piplup. He makes the most sense as a starter option in Pokemon Legends Z. I think it's only a matter of time until we get Piplup as the starter in this next region. So finally, let's go over the fire Pokemon, Scorbunny. And why do I think Scorbunny is going to be the starter in Pokemon Legends Z? I created this slideshow and this presentation on Pokemon Day. I created this without any sort of outside influence from like other people's opinions or anything at all. Since creating this slideshow, I've seen other people say that they believe Scorbunny will be the fire starter in Pokemon Legends Z, and the most compelling argument that they give is because soccer. Can I just say, I think this is the weakest argument in the every. Like, sure, soccer's popular and I love football. Just because Scorbunny is the soccer player or the football player Pokemon doesn't mean that it's going to be featured in every single European country, region, whatever. Like, don't get me wrong. Football is huge. Soccer is huge. But like, that's not why I think he's the starter. Although, to be fair, that is at least an argument for why Scorbunny could be the starter. Because football. So the reason that I chose Scorbunny as the starter in Pokemon Legends Z is actually because it debuted in the Galar region. For those of you that may not remember or may not be aware, the Galar region is based off of the UK, and obviously Kalos is based off of France. I've brought that up several times in this video. The real-world counterparts for these regions in the Pokemon universe have a lot of history, and it would make a ton of sense for that history to be shown in a Legends game with these two different regions. Now, obviously, we don't know what the story is going to be in Pokemon Legends Z, but I think it makes a lot of sense for the Pokemon regions to kind of draw some ties from the regions that are surrounding it. And don't you just think it would be really cool to see Scorbunny get some love in the new Pokemon Legends Z game and possibly introducing new lore or at least new connections between a Galar region and a Kalos region? Like, I would love to see the history of these two regions and how maybe they interacted with each other, different conflicts or resolutions that these regions had. I would love to understand the history of these regions a little bit more. And I feel like having Scorbunny as the starter for the new Legends Z game and calling out to Galar would really make a ton of sense. Maybe that's not the most compelling argument, maybe because soccer is the better argument, but I just love the idea of introducing new lore with the starter Pokemon, and that's why I want Scorbunny to be the fire starter in Pokemon Legends Z. But with all that being said, what do you guys think? Do you agree with me? Do you think these are the starters that we could be seeing in Pokemon Legends Z? Maybe I'm wrong. I very easily could be wrong. There's a lot of really good options for the starters. So who do you think the starters are going to be in Pokemon Legends Z? I would love to know and continue this discussion in the comments. I also have other videos planned for Pokemon Legends Z, other speculation videos that I'm really excited to dive into, so be sure to subscribe if you aren't already for those videos. Thank you so much for making it this far in the video. I really appreciate all of your support and, liking the video, commenting, sharing your thoughts and opinions. Let's keep the conversation going. I would love to hear what you have to say, and I will talk to you guys all very soon. Have a wonderful day. Bye, guys. See you soon. Love you guys. Bye-bye.